Hello and welcome to this Junior's Gasoline Alley, where today we're going to be working on my 2020 GMC Sierra, and this is going to be the same tutorial for 2019 to 2026 1500 Sierras and Chevy Silverados, but we've got to replace the wheel bearing because it's making a humming noise, and after 110,000 miles, well, it's cooked. So I'm going to show you how to do that, replace it, and get your truck back on the road all on your own in this video. We're going to start this project off by going ahead and lifting up the truck because ultimately we need to get the truck up in the air, but we also need to be able to remove the axle nut off of the axle stub. And to do that, best practice is not to use an impact wrench, but rather use a long pry bar or what have you to get it loose. And you're going to need the aid of friction between your tire and the ground to do so. So we'll lift the truck up, we'll pull the wheel off, and then pop out the center cap of the wheel. That's going to then allow us to put the wheel back on the truck, lower it back down to where the tire is now touching the pavement, and then we can use our breaker bar to put enough torque onto that axle nut to start loosening it up. And there we go. It's starting to loosen up. Once you've broken it free, you then jack the truck back up. And now we can just continue to take our axle nut off. There you are. That's come off. It's actually a bit hot, but this guy does need to get replaced. You don't want to reuse this. I'll have a link down below for a replacement. Before removing any parts, get a rubber mallet and give the nub of the axle a couple quick hits just to free it up from the splines that are in the wheel bearing. This is going to make things a lot easier when you start taking stuff apart. Next step with that pulled off is we're going to need to go ahead and take care of the two bolts here for our caliper to come off. Now keep in mind when you're doing this, you also want to be able to hang the caliper so that it doesn't get destroyed. To do so, I'll first start by getting the caliper bolts loosened up. So they're good to go. And then let's go ahead, undo the mount for the hydraulic disc brake line. While we're at it, we also have this 10 mil down here, which that is the 10 mil for our ABS sensor. And you really don't want to mess up the ABS sensor. Just gonna pull that out nice and cleanly. I'll take off the mount up top as well. It's gonna let me loosen this up. And now I'm just going to speed through removing the brake caliper and rotor, since if you're getting yourself into doing some wheel bearings, I sure hope you know how to work on those. And if you don't, I'll have a link up above and down in the description below on how to replace your front brakes, should that be helpful to you as well. And at this point, what we really start to have to do is, you see these two bolts up top, and there's one on either side. Well, those we got to get pulled out. So what I'm going to try to do, see if I can't get these to loosen up for me. Then you've got two more up top. And now with all four bolts that are holding our wheel bearing onto the truck broken loose, I can use my electric ratchet to make quick work of pulling all four off so that we can move on to pulling the wheel bearing now off of the hub. And all we need from here on is some gentle persuasion with something to help pry the wheel bearing loose, because you're just trying to wiggle around the base of the wheel bearing enough that you can then start to get it to pull off. This part, for sure, you'll find a little bit frustrating because everything's loose, but it's tightly bound onto the hub, and so we need to be careful since we don't want to damage the dust shield for the brake system or anything else while we're at it. Keep in mind that the hub of the truck is aluminum, so it's a little bit softer than the steel parts you're working on, so try to be non-marrying, but with a little persuasion, it'll come off for you. The axle enough. There we go. And off our old wheel bearing comes. You've got this O-ring, which I did purchase new ones of course. We'll have those linked down below. Now, I am also replacing these bolts. I think you could likely get away with it without replacing these, but to me, it is good insurance for relatively short money to replace those honking bolts. So get those out of the way here. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up the best I can. You might be tempted to use something like a anti-seize or that sort of thing, but the wheel bearings are designed to go on with a clean, dry fit. So that's what I'm hoping to get done here. Get this cleaned up, be dry in time, and once we have that done, our next step is going to be to prepare the hub so that we can put our wheel bearing on. And we're going to go ahead and start off with replacing the rubber gasket that goes between the wheel bearing and the hub flange. This helps to keep out dirt and grime. There is a second one that's further inside on the other side of the hub. And if I were to have done this again, I would have gotten a set of rubber gaskets for the inside as well. But live and you learn. So go ahead and put this on. And once you have that rubber gasket in place, I used a very small amount of silicone lubricant on the gasket itself to make sure that it doesn't get pinched when you slide the wheel bearing in. Remember, we don't want to get lubricant on the interface between the wheel bearing and the spline of the spindle, but we'll go ahead, get that put on, and then next step is going to be placing our disc brake shield on. And I found this was easiest done by using the bolts that we have to be slid through the backside of the hub and help hold the dust shield for the disc brake on while you're trying to slide the wheel bearing on. The wheel bearing then needs to get clocked and put on lightly so that you're then able to slide the wheel bearing in where that gasket was. And as you do that, you're also going to be feeding the spline of the axle into the spline of the wheel bearing. This is a little bit fiddly, so take your time while doing it because we want to make sure everything goes on smoothly. You will then turn your hand to tightening down the 4 bolts from the hub to the wheel bearing. Now, in this fashion, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a clockwise pattern so as not to pull one side of the wheel bearing in before the other. That's going to help make sure that it goes on smooth, that it's seated flat, and that everything is going to go back together properly. Take your time while doing this. It is a little tight between the axle and those nuts, and keep going through till it's snug, and then we can turn towards torquing down the axle nuts. So we're going to now torque up those 4 bolts that we have. According to the SKF guide, this is going to be 111 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to set my torque wrench to that, and we'll go ahead and get them. And keep in mind, it's important to get an accurate torque on these 4 bolts, as well as the axle nut when we get to it later. So I've got a link down in the description on how to get the SKF guide. But as you can see here on the screen, that's where the 111 foot-pounds of torque is coming from. And with those 4 hub bolts torqued down to the proper spec, it's time to go ahead and reassemble everything that you removed in the process of getting to the wheel bearing. So we'll start with putting the rotor back on, and of course, putting its locating bolt back on as well. You'll then need to move on to reinstalling the disc brake caliper. Remember to hook up the brake hose bracket that you had to remove to hang your caliper. And then don't forget to also reinstall the ABS and speed sensor that are located on the other side of the front hub. And while you're doing so, keep in mind that those 10mm bolts on both the bracket as well as the ABS sensor are thin, and so you do not want to over torque. You just want it snug so that they don't come back out. And with all the parts properly reinstalled and torqued in place, you now will want to put your wheel back onto the truck, remembering to keep that center cap popped off because we'll need to lower the truck lightly onto the wheel. All right, so now that we've put the wheel back on, we can start attaching our axle spindle nut here. And the thing with this is we need to be able to tighten it and not have the wheel move on us. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the truck just a little bit so that the tire contacts the ground, and we'll start threading that on. All right, so the wheel's down on the ground. It's a 36mm for our spindle nuts. I should also mention that the reason we're replacing the original with this is these are torque to yield, meaning the threading does deform slightly when you get them torqued up. That's part of the mechanism to help them not accidentally get backed off. But it means you should never reuse the factory axle spindle nuts because there's a high opportunity that they end up loosening up on you, and you like our wheels staying on. Threading the axle nut back on is going to take way longer than you would otherwise expect. You'll feel it start to get some real load on there. As long as you're not cross-threading, that's okay. But that's partially just the way that this nut is going to be designed. It's going to feel like it takes a lot of resistance to tighten up. Expect. And part of that's because of the corrosion that's on that axle stub. The other part is the way those threads are designed on the axle nut. It does have a higher degree of friction compared to some of the other nuts that you may be used to. Okay, once it starts getting backed up onto the face of your wheel hub, it's time to take out your torque wrench. Okay, so we're snugging up. So we went to the 133 torque. Then we're going to back off about 45 degrees. So that's about 45 degrees. Then I need to reset this for 199 to get our final torque.
Okay. And the final torque.
Okay. Let's take that on. There we are. And finally, take our cap, toss it right back in. Just go ahead and make sure you torque all your lug nuts, and you're ready to road test. So thank you for joining me on the video on how to replace your wheel bearing on one of these 2019 plus GMC Sierra or Chevy Silverados. I hope this was helpful. If it was, go ahead and hit like and consider subscribing. If you have questions on how to do this on your own truck, well, go ahead, leave a comment down below, and either I or somebody else in the community will help you get going as well.